So we're going to talk about, what I've learned in the last 10 years in terms of what I call intent management, what a lot of you call source of truth. I guess what we're really going to talk about is, mainly 3 projects, NetBox, Notobot, and Infrahub. So first, how many of you, just show of hands, are familiar with either of those 3 projects, either a user or either as someone is actually developing on it? Only a few hands? I cannot believe that. I'm sure there's a lot more than that. Because we know that's actually, a component that has been increasingly more and more important when people try to develop. What I think it's, so I forgot to present myself. So I'm Damien Garros. I'm the co-founder and CEO of OpsMill. We're actually developing Infrahub. And I think what gave me a special perspective to make this presentation is I've actually been very close to each of the 3 projects. I was the first, I developed the first plugin for NetBox. Actually worked very closely with the project for many years. I was part of the team that created Notobot, and then I went on and I created Infrahub. So in many ways, a lot of the lessons that I'm, you could say, he's actually trying to sell us Infrahub. But the truth is, those lessons actually led to why, we started this project, not the other way around. So let's look at that. So first, maybe for the many of you that didn't raise your hand, what are we talking when we say intent management? What we really is talking about is this central component, also called the source of truth, that captures all the information about your network, all the desired state of your network, and that's usually a very critical component when you want to automate. And then you have all of the systems that are connected to it from orchestrations, configuration management, the scripting, and then usually it connects to a lot of other data sources like IPAM, the ITSM, and all of that. So it's a very central component in your system. So first, let's look at what we got right. And we're gonna go quickly through that. And I think the most interesting part, the one that should generate more discussions and arguments, will be about what we got wrong. But I think what we got right for me is first this idea of having a single data model into a single system. One of the really big innovation that NetBox brought into this field was the idea of bringing IPAM and ITSM and all the system together and having a very powerful, data storage system. The second one was extensibility. It's usually mentioned as one of the key features of those platforms. When we introduced the plugin in, I think it was 2019, that really completely opened up the capabilities of what we could actually do on NetBox. The third, in my perspective, has been GraphQL. GraphQL that was introduced, I think, in 2021 with Notobot initially, was actually completely changed how we've been integrating those systems with the rest, how we've been consuming data, making all of this data that we store in those intent management platforms much more accessible. And the first one that I think for me is important is we actually right now have a lot of competition in this space, and I think it's very good because it translates to a lot of innovation. And all 3 projects are actually super active. I think it's a very healthy competition right now, and so I think that's good for everyone. Now, before going to what we got wrong, I think there's still some things we're actually working on, like things that all 3 projects are working on right now that are still, I would say, in the development. So I don't necessarily call them wins, but I think what's exciting right now is version control. There's a lot of efforts to actually bring the concept of version control, having branches, being able to have isolated environments on all 3 projects. I think it's a major change in our industry that is going to bring a lot of positive. The second one is this idea of design-driven automation, which gives us a higher level of abstraction that simplifies some very large deployments, very complex deployments, also seeing a lot of different approach on each project. I think it brings a lot of benefits to the industry. And the third one, which is probably not as known, is data lineage. This idea that we're starting to think of not just as the data, but also how we capture metadata around the data. So also a lot of very interesting things happening in this space. So now let's look at the things we got wrong. I think that's where there's going to be more interesting discussion. So I have a slide for each of them, so I'll go directly to that. I think the first one is what I call the monolithic platform. We talked about earlier that what key features of this platform is extensibility, because we're always looking at supporting more system in our network, adding more fields, adding more features. And yet what happened is because we ended up having so many systems connected to our intent management platform that it almost became impossible to upgrade them. So like I stopped counting the number of enterprises, companies that I've seen that are running like 2 years old, 3 years old platforms because they just cannot upgrade anymore. And it's kind of because the way we created it, like we have this system that we want, again, to be extensible, but we created those very tightly coupled dependency with everything in the system in a way that is just completely the opposite of what we want to achieve. So, one way we could actually do that is really think of like, we need to redefine how we put the boundaries of how we build those largely distributed systems. And we really, I think, needs to bring back what we call the transformation function. And instead of exposing the core data model of the source of truth or the intent platform to all the components, we need to transform the data and expose it into their own language, the language of the consumer, so that we really reduce the complexity and move the boundary. The second one, I think what we got wrong, especially in NetBox and Autobot, is this idea that right now we're using a tool internally called Django. I think Django is a fantastic tool. It's one of the most popular frameworks out there, but it's just that it was never designed to actually build an extensible platform. It was designed for software engineers to build one application, not a platform. And I think it's been leading to a lot of problems and technical debts. And to me, that was actually when I realized that. It's like, okay, I don't want to fight with Django for the rest of, for the next decade. That was like, they decided to start a new project. And in many ways, like, Django is a fantastic tool, but if you use it for the wrong use case, then you're going into trouble. To me, it's like, if you are trying to eat a soup with a fork, you're not going to be very successful. It's going to be very painful. Doesn't mean the fork is wrong. It's just not what it was designed to do. You probably better grab this spoon on the side. The third one is the modeling. In NetBox and Autobot, we have this very generic model. It's like you have one device. And a device, it can be a router, it can be a switch, it can be a firewall, it can be a patch panels. It's extremely generic. It's easier in some way, but the issue is that everything becomes optional. Each time you add a custom field to those models, then it adds to all of those systems, and then you really kind of are fighting against this idea. Like usually the models is supposed to tell you exactly what the data is supposed to look like. It's supposed to help you keep the data of quality and clean. But if you keep making everything optional, and if you don't really know what is going to be a device, then that actually leads to a lot of quality issue. And it also makes it really hard for outside system to understand what this type of data you actually store in there. And so there's actually a way to solve that. And for example, in a lot of, it's not something that's specific to our domain, but there's actually a technique called the polymorphism that makes it possible to have a schema that is much more dynamic, and where you could actually have both a generic device, but also have more specific models for a patch panel, for a router, for servers, and each of them have a very specific set of mandatory attributes and relationship. And when you start using those systems, that actually completely change what you can do with the data that you store. And the last one is this idea that right now we're kind of going against, we always say, oh, we want to build standards. We need to standardize everything so that we can automate. When we actually look at those platforms, today we have a huge amount of duplication of data to a point where, for example, if you want to model an entire IP fabric, you're probably going to have all of your uplinks created in all your device and all your links. But technically, you want probably the MTU of your uplinks to be exactly the same on all of those uplinks, except that the way it works today, you're probably going to end up duplicating that across all those interfaces to a point where when you actually look at something in the database, then you don't really know, like, is it this way because that's the way it's supposed to be? Is it because that's the way the standard is supposed to be or not? And so there's kind of this mismatch of how much duplication and how much standardizations do we want to manage? And it's just that as a consumer, you want to duplicate, but actually as someone that manages the standards, you want to centralize. And I think today, we're missing some features. That's one of the recent problems we've been working on in Infrahub, but I think there's a lot of very interesting things that comes when we're actually going to address that. So with that, that was my, few points. I'd love to hear your feedback and what you think we got right and what you think we got wrong.